So I want you to be more informed primarily about how Mount Rushmore came into being and why it came into being, but also briefly who's represented on Mount Rushmore, because that is perhaps the biggest question. Mount Rushmore is an important symbol, I believe, in the American story. Therefore, it's important for us to understand who is represented on it and the history of its coming into being. Now, have you ever tried to draw the portrait of somebody? Surely we were all in an art class in school at some point or another, and we tried to draw a portrait of someone or even ourselves. I know I tried that, and it often ends up just looking like a stick figure. But for me, this creates a captivating sense of awe when I look at something like Mount Rushmore. How is it possible to carve one face in the side of a towering rock face, much less four? Not only were they able to carve these faces into the side of this granite, but they were able to make three-dimensional figures that look exactly like who they were wanting it to look like. Mount Rushmore is not simply a portrait for an elementary art project. It is an amazing feat of talent and ingenuity on display from high atop the rock cliffs that overlook the Black Hills of South Dakota. Mount Rushmore is an important symbol in the American story. Again, that means it's important for us to understand the history of it. First, we will discuss why Mount Rushmore came into being. Second, we will discuss how it came into being. And lastly, we will focus on the men, again briefly, that are represented on Mount Rushmore. Because of its importance in the American story and who it represents, it is important that we ask these questions. When we look at something as captivating as Mount Rushmore, it begs the question, what motivated someone to create this monument? Doane Robinson, the South Dakota state historian, originally had this idea in 1923, first to be located in Custer State Park, but he wanted to represent maybe Native American figures or others, or Old West personalities. Well, they hired this man named Gutzon Borglum, who was a sculptor at the time working on a sculpture in Stone Mountain, Georgia. He was hired, and he said that they could not do it originally where they wanted to because of erosion. And he also wanted to put these presidents on there to represent phases in American history. The name Mount Rushmore comes from a New York lawyer, Charles E. Rushmore, who was surveying gold claims in South Dakota in 1885, is where it gets its name. Well, now that we understand a little bit of why it came into being, it's important that we ask how. We look at it and we know this had to come into being somehow. How is it that they were able to do this? Well, about 90% of the granite was actually removed with dynamite, which is amazing to me that they were able to do that without blowing the whole thing into smithereens. But they used the dynamite, and once they got to a certain place, they used a process called honeycombing, where they would drill in holes side by side of each other to weaken the granite to be able to face it with sculpting tools. The men were lowered down the face of the rock in what was called bosun chairs by 3/8 cable that were attached to winches. Now, it is said that if the winches were moved too quickly, then it would cause the face of the individual in the seat to be ran across the face of the sculpture as they were coming up the mountain. Talk about a face-to-face meeting. And speaking of faces, it's important that we talk about the faces on Mount Rushmore and what they are to represent. Again, Mr. Borglum, he wanted to tell the story of the first 150 years of America through his sculpture. That was the point. George Washington probably comes as no surprise. He is the father of our nation. Thomas Jefferson, he is the nation's third president, but he is to represent the expansion of America through the purchase of the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the size of the United States. Abraham Lincoln was chosen because he preserved the Union through the Civil War, so he's meant to show the preservation of our nation. Lastly, Teddy Roosevelt was chosen to represent the development of the United States during an unprecedented time of industrial and social development. So we've seen why it was created, how it was created, and who is represented. Again, Mount Rushmore is important to the American story because it represents who we are. Next time you see a picture of Mount Rushmore, or maybe you get to visit there sometime, I hope you will have a greater appreciation for all that went into this creation. After all, it is more than just some carved out granite, but it represents much of the story of us as a nation.